Hello, and welcome back to An Unpolished Earthling. Today we're continuing on with the manifesto, Gaia United, a pragmatic path to a healthy future. We are currently in part 2, and in this episode we're discussing the carrot and the stick. The carrot. The purpose of this step is to prove that we have the technological capacity and wisdom to design and build a desirable high-tech eco-city. As mentioned in the introduction, the city will also alleviate the fear that sustainable means primitive. The aim is to design and build one eco-city that will serve as an edutainment tourist destination. It will hold 1 million residents and cater to 1 million tourists per year, staying an average of 1 week each. It will be completely self-sufficient in terms of energy and life support, and will produce luxury goods and services to trade internationally. Its economy will focus on its tourism industry, especially theater, music, public art, technological showcases, and beautiful parks. The architecture will reflect its natural surroundings, but as the location will not be determined until much later in the project, no further description of that could be made. This may seem unusual, but the point of the city is not to showcase a specific blueprint. We are not suggesting that everyone live in a city like this one. What we are demonstrating is a specific approach to designing cities so that they can be in harmony with their surroundings. When we are ready to choose a location, it will be done through competition amongst all the nations of the earth that wish to have the prestige of holding the world's most advanced, healthy, and desirable city. Once the location has been chosen, only then will designing begin. The biggest challenge of the design will be to provide a luxurious lifestyle within a sound ecological footprint. This is to show people that being sustainable does not require abandoning a comfortable lifestyle. Determining an appropriate ecological footprint and a reasonable quality of life are both very difficult and surrounded by diverse opinions. For the purposes of this manifesto, we will presume that a sound ecological footprint means that if everyone in the world had this impact, the biosphere would still be healthy. At the current population and biocapacity, leaving 45% of the planet to wilderness, such a footprint would be approximately 1 arable hectare per person. Which is now called global hectares, and that number has changed slightly. We'll update that in future. To put this in context, North Americans consume an average of 9 arable hectares per capita, or global hectares, whilst people living in Afghanistan consumed 0.2 arable hectares per capita. This means that the limit suggested by this manifesto would require an 85% reduction for North Americans and a 500% increase in resources for people living in Afghanistan. For this latter group, this is no problem, but for the other group, the Americans, the idea of maintaining their comforts whilst reducing consumption by over 80% will seem unrealistic. The city that we propose to build will be built to prove those fears unfounded, for it is not that we don't know how to achieve luxury and abundance efficiently, but that our current infrastructure and economies are outdated, obsolete, and grossly inefficient. The design for this eco-city will follow the principles of socio-economic as described by Jacques Fresco. At the moment, Jacques has already designed cities for a vast array of climates and topographies ranging from underground to beachfront and shallow oceans, for vast ranges in population size, and furthermore, even in identical locations, socio-cyberneering can produce myriad varieties of cities depending on the preferences of the local people. The direct democracy outlined in this manifesto does not require that everyone participate in socio-cyberneering. The proposed system allows people any method of life they choose, but it is likely that most people accustomed to a modern lifestyle will be interested in socio-cyberneering. Thus, the new city is but a taste of what this epic science has to offer. It demonstrates that we can achieve abundance and progress whilst respecting the laws of our natural environment. Quick tangent note here. I'm not sure that socio-cyberneering is the right term to use, in that I haven't noticed it really catch on in the world since I was first exposed to it, and I don't know if most people have any idea what it means. Also, if you do study Jacques' work, there is a big difference between what he was talking about and what I'm talking about. And so when I say socio-cyberneering, I mean using the practical tools, the knowledge, the techniques and technologies that Jacques is talking about. The way that we can design things in a holistic way to make it more efficient and better than what we've ever had before. However, the big difference which I'm trying to make here is that in Jacques' system, he believed that one day, if the world was advanced enough, there would be no scarcity, in that we would have enough, say, robots producing everything for us, that everyone could have everything they wanted. And so in socio-cyberneering, there was never, it never seemed, at least from my research, that it was intended to have any kind of money system or any system designed to make compromises where necessary. It seemed as though Jacques was saying there just wouldn't be a need for compromise. And I absolutely disagree with that. I think that the nature of scarcity is the balance between available resources and human desire. Available resources are finite. We only have one planet, and if we expand even throughout all of our galaxy, that's still a finite amount of resources. Whereas human desire, I believe, is born from the imagination, and that is limitless. So no matter how productive society is, I don't believe that everyone would be able to get what they want, because I don't think it's possible to satisfy human desire. That's why the system I'm talking about is all about making compromises. It's all about how do we decide how best to use our resources, recognizing their finite limits. But in terms of the physical design of high-tech desirable cities, what Jacques was talking about is brilliant and amazing, and I think that we need that kind of design. And so I'm using socio-cyberneering here to refer to the technological application, but not to refer to the system of how it actually runs. And I'm actually not sure if that's the right way to use that word, so hence the little tangent there. But let's move forward now. There are a few unusual things to note about this particular city, the idea of a city we're going to build. It is a hybrid. It is a bridge between worlds, and as such, it is not a true representative of either world. This city will be built within the regime of a global neoliberal capitalist system, and it will thrive well into the new paradigm of earthly people. It is therefore imperative that people look to the city only as an example of the new technology and methods, but not as a blueprint for the vision proposed in the manifesto. And what I mean is the idea of the city is to help encourage the transition into a, let's call it a Gaian lifestyle, or a Gaian system. And because we don't have that, it still needs to be built within the current system. And that's, so it's not a perfect example of either of those two things. Unlike the cities built under the new paradigm, this one is built on a specific intention: to be an attractive edutainment tourist resort. Due to this, most of its infrastructure, its economy, and its culture will be determined by the corporation that founds it. Many of the people who will live in the city will get a fair degree of control over their own communities and housing, but many others will have the familiar experience of selecting between a few prefabricated homes or apartments. Unlike the cities built under the new paradigm, people will have to raise money to buy into this city. This is actually the most important aspect of the city, for it relates to how the city is funded and what the city proves, which we will get to in the stick, which is coming up in a moment here. The funding for this city is unique. So let's just break that down here again. So if we lived in the system I'm proposing, the city would be designed by everyone who is living in the city according to their needs and wants. Again, in this city, it can't be that way because the city has to provide a very specific purpose. So it is really just showcasing the technologies of what's possible to provide a sustainable, high-tech, desirable lifestyle. It is not showcasing how Gaia United would work or how the new system would work, because it has to function before that system exists, right? Okay, so to fund the city, how do we get this going? We will pre-sell 50,000 luxury homes to celebrities and wealthy people from around the world. To entice them to invest before the city is built, we will give them a free home for their children and parents if they buy ahead of construction. This accounts for 150,000 homes taken and an estimated 300,000 of the population. With the homes priced at $15 million each, that adds up to $750 billion. The rest of the funding will come from banks and investors who will be eager to invest in the city because it is designed to run profitably, and because it will have a massive advertising potential for any associated companies. The construction of the city will also be unusual, for in the spirit of socio-cyberneering, most of it will be done by robotics. This raises a challenge of finding the robots. Most of them have not been built yet. But there are robots that can build robots, and they can build the city. Once the city has been designed and publicized, we will see which robotics company seems to be the best choice to get started with construction. So again, in almost anything that happens in the current system, it makes sense to run a competition to see who wants to take part in it. So for example, if a government is looking for new ships for their navy, they have contractors compete to say who can give them the best price on the best kind of a ship. And the same kind of a thing, if we're going to build the coolest city that's ever existed on the planet, anyone who wants to be involved with it should be eager to be a part of it. And so instead of us trying to find a robot company to help us do it, there should be a competition for robot companies to make sure we get the best one. And that's the idea of the approach that we're going with here. Now, once completed, the city will be self-governed, although tied to a corporate mandate to ensure it functions along its intended purpose, and be self-sufficient, open to international tourism, and a beacon to a new era. It will be the most famous and most desired city in the world, and it will be ecologically sustainable. It will show the world that being a good earthly steward does not require abandoning modern technology, but rather opens a new wealth of possibilities to inspire us. Once the whole world has made the shift into the new system, this city would be relieved of its duties as an international edutainment center. At this point in time, its corporate mandate will expire, and its inhabitants will attain complete sovereignty over their home. Alright, so that's the carrot. The point of this is to show people that if you're living in a modern city today, and you feel like you have a lot of luxury, and you feel like you're doing well, and you like the things you have, you might not imagine that we already have the ability to make a city which has a much higher quality of life that is also actually environmentally sustainable, and you can feel good about living there. And we can do this today. And so by building the city, we will show everyone what is possible. And just because it is so desirable, I believe people will want it. The next part is the stick. So let's get into that. The stick. As the project moves forward, public mind will... and edit. The stick. As the project moves forward, the public mind will become more and more familiar with the whole idea. They will see that a new world is possible, and that they have the opportunity to shape their part in it. They will engage other minds more frequently and more intensely, creating a global network like never before, like the nervous system of Gaia taking shape. It will all flow smoothly, except for one almost invisible, powerful force that works against us. Belief in the global capitalist economy as regulated by the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and World Trade Organization. If we look at our ability to create a sustainable and desirable future, as visualized through Earth Awaken or Gaia United, again, not sure what the name of the website will end up being, and then we consider the raw materials and energy required to create the infrastructural transition, we will realize that there is nothing in the physical universe outside of natural catastrophes that could prevent us from succeeding. However, if we consider the desire for the transition in the context of a supply and demand economy, we should notice an exorbitantly high price tag on each new city. If we consider, and just to clarify, I mean, in supply and demand, the more you want it, the more expensive it is. A bottle of water in a desert is extremely inexpensive, but a bottle of water next to a fresh water source is not very expensive. So the price of things change depending on how much you want them, and if everyone wants this new city, that will make it expensive. If we consider that the new cities will act as alternatives to traditional cities, and consider the demand for homes in the old city, we should realize that price tags for obsolete homes would drop to almost nothing. Taking into account that the average person's wealth lies in their assets, when those assets become obsolete, their wealth will be all but lost. For a concrete example, the Pembina Institute for Appropriate Development found that the average Albertan in 2003 had $22,000 of debt. Albertans are considered wealthy, however, because they control assets. Uh, Things like expensive cars, houses, appliances, and jewelry, which they could sell if they needed the cash. And according to Calgary Economic Development, the average Calgarian has about $440,000 in calculated financial assets. In the context we've just discussed, though, the average Albertan's assets would be worth their scrap value, leaving the Albertans with just their debt. Now, I need to clarify this. There are physical assets and there are financial assets, and the data I had was actually not that clear. I did go look up more data, and I found that the vast majority of data talking about assets does not define what are the liquid and the physical assets. So when I first read this, I thought it was that they had $440,000 in physical assets, their house, their car, and things like that. However, these reports actually combine what someone might own in terms of shares in another company as well as their physical assets. So the distinction I'm trying to make here is actually not as clear as I would like it to be. But the main point is in that the majority of Albertans have most of their wealth in their physical assets. The majority of Albertans do not own a lot of stocks. There are a small portion of Albertans that own a lot of stocks, but not the average person. So for most of us, if you were to give up all of your physical possessions and the property that you're on, you would be left with your debt and you wouldn't have the ability to move forward. Buying into the new city would require a substantial loan for each average person in the world. In fact, the line's not drawn at average, but around the mark of those who have more than $1 million in liquid capital, separating the wealthiest 0.5% of humanity from 99.5% of the rest of us. And that's a gracious estimate. There's probably a lot less people than that who have $1 million in liquid capital. And what I mean there is you might have $1 million house, but do you have $1 million cash? Or do you have $1 million in a black number in your bank account, as in the positive? Because if you don't have that, you won't be able to get the loan you need to buy a $10 million home in a brand new desirable city. Due to fractional reserve banking, the bank must have at least a 10% deposit to give you the rest of the loan. So it's going to be very, very difficult for most of us. Now, it may not be assumed that these loans would be granted. So I'm saying if you're an average person and you need a $10 million loan or even a $1 million loan, but you've just liquidated all your stuff, the banks have no obligation to make that loan. But they do have an obligation to their shareholders to make profit. And considering the nature of the infrastructural transition and its associated economic, social, and political changes, the loans would likely be considered a high-risk investment and as such are unlikely to be granted. And what I mean there is, if what I'm talking about is true and we can create a world that has a different economic system, then by supporting people transition into that, the banks would be losing their potential profits, which is against their charters to their shareholders, which means that any responsible bank should not give loans to people to have a transitional city into a system that no longer needs the bank. A little bit complicated, but yeah, let's continue. So this means that for the vast majority of humanity, to make the transition out of obsolete infrastructure into high-tech progressive eco-cities, they must depend on the philanthropy of the banking industry, an industry not well known for its altruism. If the banks and governments do not prove to be monumentally altruistic, as in if the governments don't just build homes for everyone for free and the banks just let them have it, then the vast majority of humanity will be left to fend for themselves as fossil fuel infrastructure gradually grinds to a halt. And again, another tangent, we're not going to run out of oil and gas tomorrow, we're not going to run out of coal tomorrow, but 1,000 years from now, if we consume those things at this rate and we pretend that the environment doesn't get destroyed, we're going to run out of those things. Coal, for example, was only made at a time on the Earth when the bacteria that could break down plant matter didn't exist yet. And so all the coal we have exists from very, very long time ago, but the Earth isn't making more coal. So there really is a finite amount of these things, and when you run out of them, well, what happens when the truck that brings the groceries to your city cannot drive there anymore because there's no fuel for it, right? So There are alternatives. This is going to be a bit of a tangent here, but for the amount of fuel that we use, if we were to devote the farmland to growing biofuels to replace that fuel, we either wouldn't have any food to eat or we wouldn't have anywhere to live, because there just isn't that much space on the planet to make that much fuel and feed ourselves and live and have wilderness. It can't be done. It can be done if we change our consumption rate, though. So what I'm saying is, if the consumption rate is dependent on the physical nature of our lives, the fact that we're driving cars and having to move groceries from one side of the world to another just to feed people, that's extremely energy intensive. And if we can create a world where that doesn't need to happen anymore, we don't need to use that fuel, we'll be able to survive. And if we are stuck in this world that needs that energy, then sure, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, we can continue on as normal, and the consequence will be to the environment around us, but we won't run out of the fuel. But for our species, in 100 years or 200 years, we cannot maintain that. There just isn't enough fuel, and the change will be forced upon us. Now imagine trying to make this change when it's forced upon you when there's no food in the grocery store because you've run out of the fuel, as opposed to trying to make this change while we have energy and we have the capacity and we are fed and we are able to function, right? There is another way, however. Indeed, a few other ways that the transition could occur. Each government may simply take on monumental debt and build cities for all of its people with the intention of very slowly repaying the debt over time. They could pretty much print new money, which devalues the money of Oh, it's really confusing talking about economics. The government can print money out of nothing, which devalues the value of the money that's already in service. So if you have a dollar and you can buy a pop with it, if the government prints millions and millions of dollars, your dollar can no longer buy that $1 pop, and the value of the pop is going to go up to about 25, but that really means the value of your dollar decreased because they printed more of the dollars. Yeah, economics is a little silly sometimes. But the government could do that. And so it could use that money to pay people to get this going, but it would really mess up their budget. I'll say that much. They could even create new banks, grant the loans, and then default them, essentially giving away the cities for free. This is a sneaky one where you're intentionally just saying, we're going to break the economy. We're going to not follow the rules, but we're still going to use the money that people are used to using so that they don't get confused by just printing the money, but then just never paying it back. Both of these methods point out that the economy is not capable of naturally achieving the transition and would have to be adjusted so dramatically to continue to be valid that it's ludicrous. So yeah, if we're saying that if China wanted to get a whole bunch of money out of nowhere and it's taking it from the World Bank or loans from other countries, it's going to affect China's economy and they're going to be in debt, and there's a consequence. But if China were to say, let's print all this money and then we just don't care, and the world didn't hold them accountable and there was no consequence, well, we're just admitting that the game we're playing isn't real, right? It's a series of agreements. We've agreed that this is what the meaning of money will be. This is how, like the World Bank, IMF, and World Trade Organization, they've created the regulations of the rules of a game that is imaginary. And it's our agreement to play that game, our faith in it, that makes it real. And if it's the case that to succeed in surviving, humanity has to transition out of its obsolete infrastructure into sustainable infrastructure, and if it's the case that the cost of that in this system is prohibitive, and the only way that we can achieve this is by breaking the rules we've made for our own game, that shows how dumb the game we're playing is. Now, to not completely condemn the economy, however, there is another method that I have not investigated thoroughly enough to determine its worth. The idea is that each city needs to be built, so if the people who want to live there take part directly or indirectly in the construction of the city, then with exceptionally careful budgeting, they could be paid by the development company, either private or government, that has commissioned the city for their efforts. This pay is then received back by the development company as people buy their homes, which they have just built. If there is an agreement between the builders and the developer that their future wages are equal to their future assets, then no money need be raised at all, except for that which pays for the land itself, the building materials, and the living expenses of the workers, which is still formidable. But perhaps that wouldn't be a preventative sum. This setup puts a heavy suggestion on government ownership of the cities, though, as the government would own the land. And this means that they could maintain traditional political borders around the world and does away with unnatural bank manipulation while still maintaining, at least superficially, the current economy. So I don't know how well that would work. Not everyone is a city builder, and there are so many talents and professions that I don't think would be able to directly profit off of the construction of the city so that everyone would be able to move into the new city. So I don't think that one would really work, and it would be really messy and kind of awkward to figure that one out, and I don't care to do all the math on that. I put my mind into some other things to think about. Now, the most obvious problem with this idea is that we value work differently. Those who cook the food for everyone do not usually earn as much as those who design the architecture for the city. Therefore, if everyone worked equally hard, some would get paid more than others, creating a city with homes of varying standards. If these standards could be achieved without violating the concept of equitable ecological footprint once the cities were completed, then so be it. We could rebuild the world without destroying the economy. However, since most of the work will be completed by robotics, and since there is such an incredible disparity between how the work of some is valued over that of others, the fine detail of this idea would be very complex, and its ability to ensure that everyone is able to attain a desirable home in a new city is debatable and quite unlikely. It also means that scores of worthy minds would be occupied by accounting and administration of what I believe to be things that have no value to the future of society. As such, I think that to go to such extremes to maintain an economy which has been criticized for so many years and is even in theory unstable and not compatible with ecological sustainability, it's just not the best decision that we can make, especially after considering another, more rational, more prudent, and more practical solution. The solution is this: abandon the current economy, establish a human right to resources, reduce the role of supply and demand in the decision-making process, rely on the Earth Awakened or Gaia United website to determine what should be built where and how, taking into account the energy and resources available, then put robots to work on the construction and get it done. Once established, new economies will arise out of natural interactions between different groups, new currency will emerge, and I think it will be likely that we establish a new global economy. But it will be an economy where land is not for sale, and there is no such thing as a negative externality. It is a world where, I should define that here. An externality is an effect of a purchase or use decision by one set of parties on others who did not have a choice and whose interests were not taken into account. A classic example of a negative externality is pollution, generated by some productive enterprise and affecting others who had no choice and were probably not taken into account. Externalities is the technical term for how corporations destroy the planet and hurt people everywhere and do not pay for it and don't care. It's brutal, it's disgusting, it's ugly, but they have a neat term. It's an externality. It's not our problem. Anyway, I don't want to live in that world anymore. It is a world where the economy is, the one I want to create, is a world where the economy is second to the rights of the individual, which are second to the preservation of the biosphere. Thus, we focus on what we actually want to create, how it has to be done, and on doing it. I think that the aforementioned course of action is far superior to focusing on how to organize the transition so that it is profitable and conforms to the regulations of obsolete institutions such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and World Trade Organization. So yeah, again, instead of coming up with a really complicated way to figure out how we can make this messy, ugly system work a little bit better when it's not designed to work, we could just make a system that works, right? So would you design a new world around pragmatism and prudence and then infuse it with a system that is known to be flawed? Or would you rather abandon the risky system and create something new, something that reflects a paradigm of respect for each other and our living Earth? The purpose of this part of the plan is to expose the masses to this argument, to use the publicity raised by the construction of the new city in the carrot to demonstrate the incredible monetary cost of building new cities, and then to point out the difficulty that the average person would face in striving to afford a home in such a new city. At the same time, whilst raising awareness about this economic crisis, we will direct interested and concerned people to the Earth Awaken or Gaia United website, so that once enough of them choose to act, it will be easy to collectively abandon the old system and step into a new world. Alright, so you can see there how the carrot and stick go together. The carrot is, we need to show people what's possible, because I don't think most of you are aware of how amazing of a world we are capable of creating. And once you know what that could look like, and you have desire for that because this could be your life, then you need to think about how to make it real. And when you see that the biggest reason that we cannot make it real is because we've chosen to play a game that we've imagined, and that game, which is not real, not tangible, is going to make it impossible for us to survive, then you got to ask yourself, is it not time to start a new game? Thanks. Hope you have a great day.